Ladies, do you see that?
What?
What's happening out there? Oh, it's the
Oh,
magical
it's
holidays.
snowing.
You know what?
my
I forgot. I couldn't remember if you guys could see everything that was going on your end over
Yes,
there, but
that's magic.
yes, it's magic as we get ready to
Magic.
start the Just Start the Conversation podcast. It is brought to you by St. Luke's University Health Network. Jody McLeod
Cold.
Mismer and Amy Allenson Dundon, my friends. Good to be back with you. How we doing today? Everything good? Great, grand, wonderful?
Great.
Absolutely.
Great. It's
Hope you're
wonderful.
well.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays to you and yours as well. Thank you so much. So while we're very excited about this time of year, it can also be a difficult one for a lot of folks out there. And that's kind of where we're going with our conversation today as we get into talking about combating loneliness and isolation during this time of year. You know, our last episode, we talked a little bit about the grief that maybe we can feel this time of year with the idea of lost loved ones or lost things or special moments in our life that kind of make us look back and feel a certain kind of way. Certainly part of that process could be dealing with loneliness or isolation. Certainly if we've lost a loved one or someone close to us or significant other, perhaps, whatever the case may be, this time of year could be a bit of a difficult one. So I'm just going to, Amy, I'll kickstart it with you as we kind of get into this time of year, which again, I'm sure has its moments of ups and downs for a lot of people. Can you just kind of go into the ideas of loneliness and isolation and how they can certainly be a big part for some people, unfortunately, this time of year?
Yeah. So loneliness for me means that kind of twinge of negative emotion because I'm missing fellow humans. I'm missing interaction. I'm missing connection. And isolation means either on purpose or due to circumstances, you are cut off from seeing, physically being with, talking to other people. Isolation can lead to loneliness. Loneliness and isolation can lead to symptoms of depression and anxiety for some people. And we all know that, COVID still hangs around, but this pandemic has taught all of us about isolation and loneliness. And some people were able to fight through that well and find new ways of connection, and others really still have a hard time with it. And even at the holidays, there are people and families, depending on your circumstances and who maybe is in ill health and what's best for everybody, that are still having big decisions about whether or not to gather. So loneliness is something that we can go back to the whole grieving podcast that we had done and talk about how death and dying leads to loneliness. But loneliness, you can be lonely and still have people around you.
Sure.
That's the difference, I think. In some of the marriage and family therapy work that I've done, it's been said, I'd rather be lonely and alone than lonely in a relationship. And there are many people who are in relationships and in families and are still feeling lonely. And, that's, I think, something that we need to talk about, because that's how you know that you need to find a way to connect to people, even if the ones that you're with, aren't cutting it for you, aren't helping you feel good. Or
I think what exacerbates the loneliness, though, is that what often comes with feeling lonely is some lack of some self-worth and perhaps some self-doubt that drives some of that. I mean, what do you think about that, Amy? I mean, when I think about loneliness in terms of that feeling of being alone or being separate, is there, I guess my question to you is can that be exacerbated by kind of a feeling of self-doubt or self-worth?
I think so. And so I when you were saying that, I kind of feel like that opens the rabbit hole of why, as a clinician, my question would be, what are you telling yourself that's making you feel so doubtful about yourself? And are you feeling lonely because maybe other people are bullying you, or
Sure.
because like there's so many reasons that our self-esteem might be low. Yes, if my self-esteem is so low that I don't feel like I fit in or connect with people, or there are groups of people that I feel are not accepting me, um, you know, that all leads to loneliness and isolation, for sure. Self-esteem, self-worth, um, can keep us isolated.
And it's amazing what isolation does, especially to our older adults. You know, in our specialty here at St. Luke's with psychiatry, we know that our older adult population is at a higher risk of isolating, not necessarily by choice, but by where they are in their life. And being isolated can actually impact someone's physical health and their mental health. And I mention older adults because sometimes they don't have the capacity to choose to not be isolated. You know, maybe they're not driving anymore. Perhaps they don't have a way to get out anymore. So I think there's an opportunity that we have, for some of us to connect with individuals who we know may be isolated. Um, they may feel lonely because they're isolated, but they're isolated not necessarily by choice. But I think there is another group of individuals that might isolate by choice and choose to isolate. And I'm wondering, Amy, how do we impact that? How do we recognize that?
So, and I don't think this is necessarily a holiday type answer. This is a 24/7, 365 answer. I think the first thing that we need to, again, I go back to my don't beat around the bush quote, where if I'm worried about
We
something,
might change the name.
Remember
We might
that?
change the name of the
hang it up.
podcast to the "Don't Beat Around the Bush" podcast. It might be, or that's a spinoff from here or
I
something.
mean,
Here's the thing. That's Amy's spinoff,
Yeah.
like
Well-
Joni and Chachi.
Oh, yeah.
Throwback.
Throwback. So, okay, where was I? So I think for the older person in your life who you're worried about, that maybe you think that they're isolated, you think that they're lonely, check it out with them, because they may be really content.
Yeah.
Not
That's so true.
Not doing like
That's
the
so
New Year's
true.
Eve celebration. They're
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
I want to watch the ball drop and go to bed.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Or I don't even want to watch the ball drop.
Right.
I just want to go to bed.
Right. So check it out, because
That's
again,
true.
our agenda
That's
is
true.
not theirs.
Yeah.
But especially especially for our older population, check in with them, and are they physically okay? So here's an example. An older person that maybe is starting to experience hearing loss.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
You may not even know that their hearing is going, or maybe too embarrassed to admit it.
Yeah.
And you think they're isolating or staying apart for other reasons, when in reality they can't hear. So it's not fun for them to be sitting where everybody is sitting and listening to the conversation, because it makes them anxious, because they can't hear what's going on.
And you also make assumptions about someone because you assume that they don't understand. And I know I'm the one that usually brings the anecdotes from home. So my dad wears hearing aids, and the first thing they do when he goes into the hospital is they secure all of the belongings. Well, guess what one of the belongings is that they typically take away from him? His ability to hear. So then they're talking to my 87-year-old father, and he can't hear. So he just says yes to everything.
That's awful.
Or no
That
to
is awful.
everything, right?
Yeah.
So they're like, oh, we understand. So your dad. And I'm like, my dad can't hear you. So, you're right. I watched that. And
Yeah.
So anyway, I digress.
But
Joni loves Chachi, my dad.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's okay. But that's pretty much everybody in your life. Check out, are they physically okay? Is there anything going on with them that we maybe need to help them get to their primary care doc to address, before we assume that they're lonely in the corner? It may not be that at all.
That's a good point.
That's why I'm a huge believer in asking and throwing it out there and helping that person get the community support that they need for anything that might be going on.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So you mentioned the older community in particular brought up a bit of my history. My grandmother, my mom's mom, um, lost a few of her children. She was, I think she was 89 when she passed, but lost a few of her children. I had one specific family member that wasn't even the baby, but was kind of the baby. Was always taking particular care of him. He had his um, issues. Well, I'll say that, and he ultimately succumbed to some of those issues. His health was ultimately um, what led to him passing away. And I can remember who lived with us. My grandmother lived with us, and I can remember her. She was very much the person that liked her own space, liked her isolation, like would come out and have dinner with us and do all that stuff. But you never had to twist her arm to be like, "Hey, come." She was either going to do it or she wasn't. She was perfectly happy being in her space, watching her stories, doing her thing. But I can specifically remember because I was at, an older teenager, young 20s, where I could kind of see she was isolating herself for negative reasons, not so much because I just want to be by myself and I like being by myself and I don't want to bother anybody else. But I could tell that once he passed, something in her felt very much like, I kind of hate to put it like this, but that she was kind of ready to go herself. Like she had which, as I reflect on, as I'm older and I think about it, I think, gosh, I wish I would have tried to have more conversation, but that was just her. That was grandma. She liked to be by herself. She liked to do those sorts of things. As we talk about the older people in our lives, if maybe that's something that we're seeing, how do you kind of have that conversation? Even now, thinking back on it, being in my early 20s and trying to have that conversation with this woman who had been through so much, like I'd mentioned, had lost at that point 4 of her 7 children. I can almost kind of understand maybe her thought process there a little bit, but that doesn't mean you want to. I hate to say you want to support it. So I guess my conversation is, if you see somebody in your life that's like that maybe it's just at that point where they're like, I'm just going to ride this thing out. Man, how do you kind of have that kind of conversation or encourage them to come to the family dinner or encourage them to kind of do those things when maybe that's the point that they're at?
Okay, I'm going to let Amy go, in her clinical way, but I'm just going to say it this way: go to them. Sometimes getting somebody to come to you, that's much more challenging than you going to them and sitting with them. So they're still in a space that they're safe and they feel comfortable, but you're engaging with them kind of on their own terms, if you will. So it's a bigger deal for me to leave my space and participate with you because I may be going through something. It's easier for me to stay in my space and for you to come to me. I don't care if it's that you picked up ice cream at the store and you're like, hey, can I come in and eat this? Do you want some? Let's have some. I don't think doesn't have to be fanfare. Now that's a non-clinical, but my first thought as you were saying that was go to them.
Well, and that's what I was going to say.
Oh, look at me. Look at you. Look at me.
Oh, clinical and stuff.
Oh, clinical and stuff.
I don't think that's clinical. I think that's human.
Yeah.
So
thanks, Amy.
I think that
officially not an alien.
Right. So I think that it's important that we take turns with that. So what I mean is, if the person that's kind of lonely and isolating has other people in their life besides you, coordinate with them and say, hey, I'm going to go this Thursday. Can you go next Thursday? Let's make a Google calendar. I forget what they're called. Shout out Google or
Google
whatever
calendar.
they are. Okay.
It's a Google calendar.
Yes.
Okay. One of those shared calendars that everybody can kind of put stuff into, hey, I'm going to do dinner with her next Wednesday. Can you do breakfast next Thursday? And show up. And if you can get that person to leave the house and go to a diner, fantastic. If you have to sit in a rocking chair and eat the ice cream with them and talk about the stories that are on TV, then that's what you do. But if they can't show up for you, you show up for them.
Mhm.
And it doesn't mean you have to show up and talk about feelings and do therapy. No, you just need to be with that person.
Yeah.
That's it. And you can let them know, hey, I'm coming over to watch American Idol on Wednesday night and I'm going to bring ice cream.
Love American Idol.
You know, I don't know. American Idol just came
Could
to
be
the top of my
Survivor,
head.
too.
Survivor.
Yeah.
It, certainly sports, you know, whatever.
Could be anything.
Could be
Not
anything.
the Phillies, though.
So
too
listen,
soon.
we're way
So-
past. It's the
It's
holidays.
December.
and
Get
it's too
over
soon.
it.
Not over it.
So no, I think that's important though. I think that there's that option that you always have to go to them. It always kind of, this might be a pet peeve of mine. I have a couple. This might be a pet peeve though. When people, what? You're a little scared about
That's
what I'm
your
about to
spin-off
say, aren't
podcast.
you?
That's your spin-off podcast now. It's the Pet Peeves podcast.
Pet peeve, that's hard to say. No, but when people get frustrated because they're not participating in something that
Sure.
perhaps was available to them, I find that to be frustrating. But that's my problem. I need to find out by going to them what makes them feel happy or makes them feel like they belong. Meaning, if we go do something and everybody knows we're going, and that person, in my mind, chooses to not go with us, instead of me being angry with them because they didn't come and now they're complaining about it, I need to recognize that there may be other things, to your point, hearing loss, just feeling uncomfortable. Maybe there's weight gain or weight loss, or they chipped a tooth and they don't want to go out. It's important for me to remember, and for all of us to remember, that sometimes we need to go to them and show up for them. I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, maybe the place that we were going triggers something for them
For
that
sure.
we have no idea about
Yeah.
and we'll never know about. It's respecting somebody where they're at, but caring enough to say, I'm not going to let you alone. And maybe that's my agenda. It very well might be. That's okay. I mean, if I haven't seen you in 3 weeks
Mhm.
and you know you're being evasive in answers, or we haven't talked on the phone, and I say to you, all right, I'm going to stop by, and I go to you and you're real quiet or you're not saying much, you know, maybe it's my agenda. Maybe you're fine.
Mm.
Maybe I have to look at why I'm uncomfortable with your isolation.
Yeah. I think though, when someone's isolating and they're really kind of cutting themselves off from contacts, it's recognizing that it affects other pieces of their being. You know, I was surprised to read actually that isolation increases blood pressure. That shocked me. There was
Yeah, yes. But we also
she's poking
I'm
me.
poking because we were texting with an old colleague about hugs and touch and
Mhm.
connection
Mhm.
and the importance of hugs, and that
And
trick when you were
asking for hugs before you give
and
them.
asking before you give them, yes. But yes, isolating increases blood pressure. Hugs can decrease blood pressure.
Because
Physical
social
touch.
interaction and physical touch
Yep.
lower all of that.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're right. There's a definite mental definitely, but definite physical health impact of loneliness and isolation.
Yeah.
For sure.
And it's so fascinating to know that you can impact that. There was a video that I saw many years ago about compassion and the older adult, and I was just telling this to my husband the other day. What was really fascinating about this video was they talked to a whole group of individuals who were, you know, octogenarians, and some of them were in their 90s, and they asked them the last time they had been touched. Not in a let me take your blood kind of way, but when was the last time someone held your hand, put their hand on your shoulder, gave you a hug? It was fascinating to hear what some of those individuals shared, and just how important that human contact is and that human interaction is. And we learned a lot of that. Well, I shouldn't say we learned, because you always knew, right? You were trained to know that everything that happened during COVID and the pandemic was kind of enforced isolation, but we were predicting and had conversations and predicting the impact that was going to have. We were looking at it from the mental health perspective, but our colleagues on the other side were like, people are going to have increased risk of heart attack, and they're going to have blood pressure issues, and we're seeing some of that, right? You know, right now. So yeah, we know that. But I think, to go back to loneliness, just because we focused a little bit more on isolation, you know, Amy, you had said, I can feel lonely in a room full of people.
Mhm.
And you know, how do we handle that, or how do we recognize that in someone?
Well, I think how what we need to do is to teach people how to be assertive. And again, if you don't have real great self-esteem, that's hard.
Mm-hmm.
But in order to not feel lonely in a room full of people, I need to find a way to connect with someone. It's why we teach elementary school kids as an icebreaker, find somebody with the same birth month as you.
Mm-hmm.
So that they have to get up in class and talk to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And say, when were you born? When were you born? That teaches social connectedness. It teaches small ways to find some sort of similarity with another human being. We're doing all of those icebreaker type things with our littles for a reason, so that when they get big, they have a skill set.
I never thought of that, but something I do to this day, I will ask someone where they're from. Not your origin of being, but, hey, where do you live? Where did you go to high school? I often ask our residents or physicians or whomever, I'll say, oh, where did you go to school? And they're very quick to tell me where they went to medical school. And I'm like, no. Where did you go to high school? And they're in their 40s or 50s or 20s or 30s. And they're like, oh, high school? Oh, I went to, Bangor, or I went to, wherever. And then finding that common ground with them. I never put together that was because, Mrs. Perugino made me find my birth twin.
It may not be why you ask, but that's when we learn. It's how we learn.
Shout out to Mrs. Perugino.
What up, Mrs. Was it Perugino? What up, Mrs. P?
Mrs. P rocks.
I liked her.
Yeah. But so it's okay. It's helping people that don't know how to connect with others find one way to connect.
Yeah. I like that.
It doesn't have to be, sharing some sort of great talent or gift. It can just be having, we do this with people that are very shy. Mm-hmm. Find somebody in the room who's wearing the same color as you and just go ask them one question. Mm-hmm. Put yourself out there. What's the worst thing that's going to happen if you ask them a question about where they went to high school?
But if you're lonely and loneliness, it's a symptom. Is it?
It can be a symptom of depression.
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's what we have to keep an eye on as humans, is, who around me seems lonely, and have I checked that out with them? Hey, do you want to go out? Do you, let's put a couple dates on the calendar. Planning's important. We were talking about our elderly population, or as people get older, and I'm starting to get in that category. So, it's important to say
closer than I am.
I am closer than you are.
Okay.
Don't leave
Don't
me
worry, Amy.
alone in the
Amy,
rock.
I can edit that part out.
It's okay.
It's
it's important that we check on each other and we ask each other how we're doing. And say, I haven't seen you in a while. You seem quiet. Mm-hmm. Are you okay?
I am. I know you weren't
so
asking
glad.
me,
I wasn't,
but I felt like I needed to answer.
So finding ways to help people connect. If people are not connecting and are way out of the norm for them, in terms of how they're acting or what they're doing, we want to check on, getting them in with the family doc, so that they can check on physical wellness to make sure it's not a blood pressure issue, or to make sure it's not a dementia issue, or
Mm-hmm.
or it's not a depression, or an anxiety that's keeping them away. There could be a million reasons. It's important to help people connect.
So I think, kind of going back on my situation that I had with my grandmother, I kind of look back on it and kind of look at my ability to emotionally connect at that point in time. And
Mhm.
when you're 18, 20, 22, um, I look back at it now in my mid 30s and think, gosh, I wish I could have gone back and felt a little more. And that's kind of what we've been chasing with all these different episodes in this podcast is, for as much as we think we know about things, we we don't, and we can see things differently, and there's different perspectives, and there's the ability to understand and ask questions. And if you would have come to me the minute before we started recording this thing and told me like, hey, one of the key points in this is going to be an icebreaker of asking people what their birth month is or where they went to high school, you think like what kind of, but it's the reality of it. We all certainly feel uncomfortable in situations. My job is literally to talk to people every single day, but it's hidden behind headphones and a microphone. Get me out in a public scenario and I'm still like, like it takes a lot for me to initially get out of that shell. And that's just kind of what this episode, I think in particular, is about, is just trying to understand perspective. To your guys' point earlier, I wish that at that younger age, I could have gone to my grandmom and not just expected it to be like, oh, she just wants to be by herself. Like gone in there and been like, hey, lady, let's watch Matlock together. Right.
Right.
She loved Werther's Originals. We'll pop a couple, we'll sit there.
Yes.
And I think which is so much easier said than done, because again,
Sure.
at that age, your emotional intelligence is so limited.
Mhm.
But I think that's what listening to podcasts like this and talking to professionals like yourselves, I think that's why that's so wonderful and great and excellent, because it gives you this kind of eye-opening, like, damn, well, that's why they don't want to come and go to dinner with everybody, because X, Y, and Z might be going on here, or this reminds them of whatever the case may be. So we hope, certainly as we're in this holiday season, that you maybe take an extra second and take a look around the table, take a look around the room, take a look at who's not there, and maybe try to reach out in a different kind of way than maybe you have before.
Yeah, that would be a good New Year's resolution.
That would be an excellent New
Yeah.
Year's resolution. That is really good. That feels like a really good place to wrap this one up here today, ladies. That was excellent. To both of you, happy holidays, happy New Year. We'll certainly catch up with you guys again in 2023. So
Yeah,
I
lots to talk
appreciate
about. 2023 is going to be a big year.
I appreciate the insight as always. Although I've never told you guys where I went to medical school. You've never asked me where I went to school, so I'll save that for the next year.
Okay.
I think.
Excellent.
Excellent.
We'll see if I get into it. It's the Just Start the Conversation podcast, and it's brought to you by much smarter people than me at St. Luke's University Health Network. You can find this podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and of course at sluhn.org. Amy Allenson Dundon, Jody McLeod Mismer, it is always a pleasure to talk to you both, and nothing but well wishes to you and yours in the new year.
Same to you.
You too.